Welcome to the Takedown. Going ahead and going, excuse me, we're going to go ahead and start subverting power or radical thought. That's what we believe in here. That's what I strongly believe in. And that's what I'm going to be serving up. First and third Monday, of course, I think the first Monday of this month, I was out at the Left Forum, and I'm glad to have been there. I think it was a very good event. And frankly, there's a lot of information that can be gained at these types of events. And even though I didn't go to the People's Summit, I think that the People's Summit is also a noteworthy event to attend. Even if I don't necessarily agree with the speakers necessarily what they're speaking about, it's important that we go out there and meet other people that are trying to accomplish something in their own right, form networks and share information and things of that nature. So it's a good thing to really go to these and meet people and talk to them. So the title of today's episode really, before I even get to that, last week's episode, we had a slight conversation with B and Salam concerning just a conversation about the universal basic income versus a federal job guarantee. And I feel like there were certain things, like in my attempt to really talk and debate and also guide the conversation at the same time, I sort of forgot to make some points that I would normally make. And so I'm going to take some time to just go ahead and clarify that. If you guys haven't seen that, you guys can check in my channel. I have my own channel, the Takedown Nick. There's a channel of its own. Please subscribe, like, share with your friends. Really this channel is intended to be a place where people who may or may not necessarily pay attention to everything could come and get like general overviews of like leftist thought and how it works, and just a general conversation to ideas that they may not be exposed to on a daily basis. We know that they're not exposed to these ideas on a daily basis. But I just want to clarify a couple of points. Number one, I think when me and Salam were talking, we were speaking about, he was speaking about funding and how it should be funded in a certain way and things of that nature. And I made the comment that it's my assumption that, any type of program like this will be funded through money creation. And that's with the understanding that government spending is not funded through taxes. All funding for government spending at the federal level, when you have a state that issues a sovereign currency, that funding comes through money creation. That's kind of how they spend first, and then later on, they tax as a separate mechanism to do separate things. But the spending actually comes through money creation. Once you have a sovereign currency, the government spends at its own resource, I think is the way someone else said it. And this is MMT, kind of like the basics of how to really talk about these issues, because once you start talking about trying to fund it and things like that without really understanding how it works or how it's funded, you're kind of on dangerous territory. Second thing I want to make clear, I spoke about the idea that when you have a basic income, that consumption may not necessarily increase. And to everyone else who's listening, that may sound very strange. It's like, well, how can consumption not increase? If you have more money, people should consume more. Well, I sort of left out the part where I brought it back full circle, and I would say, well, in order for consumption to increase, there has to be an increase in production. And as long as the means of production are controlled and the levels decided by individuals, there's no guarantee that an increase in the money supply will necessarily lead to an increase in production. And that's another one of the weaknesses I think the UBI kind of has versus a federal job guarantee. And the reason why I will say this is because the federal jobs guarantee actually produces more goods and services, particularly those that would disproportionately enrich the lives of the least well-off in the middle class and so on, all matriculating up. So that's why I believe that, the federal job guarantee is superior in that aspect, and it kind of has tendencies to act as a counter-inflationary as well as inflationary at the same time. So to me, that's an advantage. Now, the third thing I was going to say is I spoke about this a lot, but, again, the version of the federal job guarantee that I'm envisioning is something where it can have a robust implementation and a robust way that we can define and redefine work. So it kind of has ability to sort of transform our system and the nature of relations between the employer and the employees. And so, but that's also another reason why I tend to favor the federal jobs guarantee. And just to segue right into today's topic is radical transformation. And I think the title of this episode, if I look down here at the YouTube, is Radical Transformation versus Compromise. Why the left must, compromise versus radical transformation, why the left must do the latter. And when we're talking about the UBI versus the federal jobs guarantee, I'm going to make the case that the UBI is not as transformative as we may think it is. And I'm just going to say, like, everybody knows, like, basic algebra, y equals mx plus b, right? In that formula, you just have a linear function, straight line, has a steady slope. There's nothing, where there's one, rise over run, always 1 over 1, it's going to be 1, right? Okay. When you add a UBI, what you've done is you've added something to the B. And this is what's known as an offset, a bias. You just changed the y-intercept on the function. And so what you've done, and I'm going to draw this, and I might stick it up here. It may not actually come out very well on the camera. What you've done is you've moved the bottom up, but you've left the function unchanged. And what I want to say to you is the goal is to change the function, not move the bottom up and leave the function unchanged. And I think that is fundamental to any type of transformative program, that we make sure that we understand that our goal is not to sort of adjust the edges or just put an offset on the same old function. It's to change the function. And so, like, if you look, I don't know if you guys can see that, but I tried to give it a little drawing here. Like, there's a function there. You see, you have one going through the origin there, and then you have like one that's an offset with the UBI on there. That was probably really horrible, but I was just trying to get very, very, very basic. Very, very, very basic. Just at the very basic level. That's what a UBI tends to do. The rest of the functions remain unchanged. The rest of society largely may remain unchanged. And the way that the system is set up, just increasing the money supply on its own, has a tendency, if you don't change anything else, if other changes aren't going in at the same time, it literally would just have a tendency of reproducing what we are almost already in. So it'll be a space lift on the current system with nothing changed underneath. It'll look a little better on the beginning, but underneath it's the same thing, and that's the problem. A federal jobs guarantee goes a lot further in changing, or has the potential, let me rephrase that, the potential to go a lot farther in changing those relationships, changing the dynamics of the system, such that we end up with something radically different than what we started out with. So in going along in that vein, we're going to talk about half measures and compromise. So a common piece of propaganda, that people use to kind of corral people that have radical ideas, to kind of corral people like me who say, no, the real solution is this, we should just do the real solution, or the most efficient way to do it is this, so we should just do the most efficient thing. One of the common pieces of a talking point to kind of corral people away from that type of thinking is that, well, it's two pieces I'd say. One, that's an idealistic position, or it's not possible, right? And then the second one is that in order to do something like this, it has to take time, and we just can't do it very fast right now. Over time we can get these things done, but it's just really going to be really slow, and we have to move slowly and methodically. And I'm gonna come back to that, but I'm gonna first start off by saying these two things, this way of thinking, its first and foremost effect is to extend the life of the current status quo. When you start talking about you can't change something, or that this is, it has to move slowly, or let's take our time with this, its primary function is to extend the life of something that is already there that needs to be changed. You basically gave it an extension. So rather than change it in a timely manner, rather than move towards something, you've kind of just, oh, wait a minute, hold on, let's think about this and let's move. Well, maybe we can't do that. Okay, well, how about you take this instead, which may not be what you wanted, but it's something, it's like a placation. In the end, that stuff just serves to extend the life of the current status quo. And there shouldn't be any ambiguity about that. Like, we shouldn't be ambiguous. We shouldn't be trying to second guess it. We shouldn't let ourselves get bogged down in the minutiae of details or process. We need to just look at the basic level, sheer basics. When you're talking about moving slowly, when you're talking about this can't be done or that can't be done, this is the end of history, this is the best that we've ever achieved, this is the best it is, or maybe what we have is good, but we just need to change things around the edge. That kind of thinking only reproduces the exact same thing people are seeking to change. And so I said in another episode that, when the establishment has their politicians, their goal a lot of times, first and foremost, is to derail change altogether. As it stands right now, they don't want change that goes against their interests or the interests of their patrons. And notice I said patrons, not constituency. I used to say constituency, but I realized that that's not the correct term. It's better to say patrons, because then you understand, you vote for a politician or you support a politician, you're not their patron. You're not paying for that politician. Patron refers to a very specific subset of people, a very specific class of people, the people that actually get what they want from politics. And those are the people who the politicians work for, and for those, and the politicians are the people those people work through. So let's just kind of face that and be upfront with it and be like, okay, this is what it is. Now, moving forward, the establishment's first goal is to derail change altogether. Now, if they're unsuccessful in derailing it, what they want to do is grind it to a halt. They want to slow it down, bog it down on minutia, get people distracted, kind of, get into the details and get people confused. And once there's confusion, with detail and basic concept, it's really easy for people to be funneled right back into something that, they may have been trying to avoid altogether. And I think if you look at history, and I'm gonna talk about this in a little bit, there's a good quote. That's something that has happened time and time again. People try to change something and they get slowed down. You start getting stuck in process. And you start getting in legal proceedings, and you somehow along the line, you really haven't made it anywhere. You thought you did. You did a lot of work. You ran around. You did the protests. You went down. You marched. You called your congressmen. You did all those things, but somehow it just never really panned out the way you would have liked it have panned out, and that's because largely, you just got bogged down in process, and you just got lost. You just got lost in the details. And let's say something actually does make it through that process. Let's say they slow it down, and then finally, after all that, you just push through. You just push and make it all the way through anyway. Well, what happens? What happens? Well, now the establishment comes and they say, well, we'll compromise. You're not going to get all of what you want. I'm on your side. I want to give you, X. And if you don't take what I'm giving you, you'll get nothing. Is it nothing better than something? You don't want to be unreasonable. You don't want to ask for things that are impossible. That stuff's never going to happen. I don't know. That's the kind of stuff that they hit you with. Like after basically you have the adequate public support, great. I want you to first recognize you're not going to get anything without an overwhelming support, period. So they come to you under the illusion that they still have the power, and really you have the power. They come to you as though, oh, we're giving you something, when as if, they were the people that made this happen, when you are the people that are making something happen. And they're just being kind of pulled along with the tide, and they're trying to kind of redirect it as best they can, navigate it as best they can, manipulate it as best they can. But they'll come to you as if they have the power and say they gave you something when really you took from them something that they didn't want to give to begin with. And so ultimately what it comes down to is, we as the left or people that I would call leftists, I don't necessarily, like to put labels on it, but I would say like people that are trying to really change things in a leftward direction to kind of bring some justice and fairness to the United States, something that's, long overdue. We're in a tough spot. And so, I'm going to take this time and talk about kind of like when I'm out there and I talk to people, and I take some time out of my day, like every week, to make sure that I'm going and engaging with people so that when I come here and I speak to you, I'm not just, shooting from the hip. Like I'm talking about things that I know that you're going to encounter when you speak to people. I'm talking about things that you've heard that you may feel. And that's why I want it to be super, super relevant to you so you can understand, maybe a different way of thinking, and maybe you can go back and show other people this new way of thinking. Maybe it can spread, maybe it can grow. This is my form of activism. This is why I do this show. This is why the show is titled Subverting Power of Radical Thought, because I'm here to think radically and expose people to radical thought one way or the other and try to get it out there. But as I said, we're in a tough spot. We want to be reasonable. I mean, it just sounds so difficult to go into a situation knowing that you have lives on the balance, or there's people's livelihoods that are at risk, or things like that, and not really understand that you can't go into a conflict not willing to risk anything if you expect to win anything. It's a very difficult position to be in. And I'm not one of those people that is up on a high horse or anything like that that'll tell you, well, you should just risk everything and it really doesn't matter because people are risked all the time. I'm not that type. I won't tell you that. I'm just going to say it's just a tough spot to be in. You have to gauge, not just what's in front of you, which is what a child does, gauge what's in front of you, but you have to gauge kind of, the future, and then have some understanding of the past at the same time, again, so you can't be confused. So it sounds so reasonable to kind of cow to that and say, okay, well, I'll be reasonable and I'll take this and then I'll come back later. But what I'm going to tell you is, why would you cower? Why would you cower when you have the strength, you have the power? Why do you do that? Why? There's no need to negotiate. Like, negotiation is really between equal parties. You negotiate with somebody who has similar power to you, or you guys kind of operate independently of one another. These people are public servants. They don't have the same amount of power as us, so to speak, if that makes any sense to you. Like, we don't negotiate with these people. The agenda is set by us. So when we have the agenda and we want them to do something, we don't negotiate with them. We tell them what it is. And if they don't want to do it, they're out. Like anything less than that, you're kind of giving up that power. And I know the art of war goes, you are weakest when you think you are strong, and you are strongest when you think you are weak. Even though we're not exactly doing it, we're actually turning that on its head. We're strong and we're thinking we're weak, and we're trying to negotiate because we think we're weak. So part of making that quote accurate is to understand when you are strong, understand when you are weak, when you have to negotiate, when you don't have to negotiate. I think right now the left is at a time where we're seeing a huge surge in power. The issues are kind of coming to us. There's the situation is so terrible that there's a lot of options. People are opening up their minds. And so now you don't have to cow to a conservative ideology. You don't have to cower to neoliberalism. You don't have to unify into something where they hold the power. And what I mean by that is there's all this push for unity, and there's all this push for compromise, and there's this need not to be contrarian, but there's nothing wrong with being contrarian. Contrarian merely means seeking the root of the issue, not going along with the common way of thought. And to be honest with you, odds are when you're not going along with the common way of thought, understanding how thought can be policed, understanding how the market can be used to coerce thought, understanding how people can be indoctrinated into thinking certain ways. If you're not thinking like everybody else, if you're not thinking the common thought and you've taken a real hard look at yourself, been intellectually honest, taking the time to do what's called some real truth seeking, if you're not thinking the same as somebody else or everybody else or the common consensus, odds are you might be on to something that needs to be brought to light. And we need to kind of keep being contrarian, if that makes any sense. So like, I just don't think that we should embrace like this idea that, you know, we're being disagreeable to just be disagreeable. We have principled, fundamental disagreements with how these things are panning out. And those things, those principled disagreements should be the baseline from which we form a new vision, a new goal for how we want to move forward. Now, I just spoke about unification with neoliberals. Let me talk about that. Like, there are some issues where we do have some agreement with them. But the problem is when you ally with them in a specific instance, it's, well, right now, as a representation of the left, you are aligning yourself into, or you're unifying into a structure where they dominate. So again, you end up in a situation where we want to destroy neoliberalism. We want to get rid of it, but you can't get rid of it if you're agreeing with it and allying with it and working with it to do something else. You'll never get around to that fight, because guess what? As long as it's there, we have to fight it. But the right will not go anywhere. So the question is, either you fight them both at the same time, and you can't do that by allying with them. You can't fight both of them at the same time by allying. You have to stand starkly in contrast to both of those ideologies, conservatism and conservatism masquerading as liberalism, which, you know, neoliberalism. You know, you have to basically stand in stark contrast and offer a different vision from both of those. And that can't be done when you're working with them because you're scared to lose, or you're scared that the right may win. They are both the right in different ways, but they are both, you know, a very, very conservative right-wing ideology. So I don't think that, you know, working with them for the sake of trying to accomplish something in the interim or something in the short term is a good idea if that runs contrary to what you need to do to have any type of left-wing victory separate from them in the long term. And I think what we really need to understand is sometimes doing stuff in the short term for short-term gain has long-term consequences. And sometimes we just have to play a long game, and there may not be a short-term victory. And I think Chris Hedges says this first, you know, we need to be ready to go out in the political wilderness. We need to understand that we face a situation where we are out there alone, and we have two choices: unify with neoliberals and extend its life beyond its years, because it should be long gone already, but we keep extending it for fear of the right and look at the horrible feedback that it creates. Or we can do our own thing, build something outside of that, go and make coalitions with people that have been waiting to make some sort of coalition, but we're so stuck on a D or an R, a red or a blue, you know, somebody being a person of color or being, trans or LGBTQT, somebody being that we're not really focused on what we really should be focusing on, and it should be focusing on issues. Maybe some sort of coalition can be formed between like Greens, DSA, and all the other various groups that are seeming to kind of coalesce together and try to do something. Maybe there's a coalition that can be formed that y'all could run candidates on a common cause. I mean, I think I have somebody that I met at the Left Forum, and I think that he really kind of opened my eyes. He gave me an example of a town called Richmond, where they're doing just that. And I hope to have them on the show. I hope you guys tune in for that conversation that's coming up at some point. I have a schedule. I'm trying to get that to come around. But I think, I've always kind of dreamed about this coalition of leftist organizations and parties, perhaps coming together and having like a common platform, and them all supporting each other. Like, they may not be able to have the coverage everywhere for each different party, each different faction, but all of them together should be able to cover areas that, each individual party can't. Maybe that can be some kind of model moving forward. I don't know. But back down to this, doing what I was saying, where we're talking about negotiating, we're talking about compromise, and how compromise and negotiation really doesn't exist between unequal parties. And I'm going to tell you that the people have more power than the politicians. We just need to learn how to exercise it and exercise control over them, rather than be manipulated by them and be manipulated by the spectacle that they can use the media to create for us. So that's what I want to say on that. And now I kind of want to move to talking about, the difference in trying to, from a politician's perspective now, the difference in trying to wait for a change to come, or the difference in trying to be active in creating that change. And I think there's no greater example than what Corbyn is doing in the UK versus what Bernie Sanders does here. Like, I think now, granted, the United States, we have a different election system, and this is where propaganda was born. And there's no strong labor unions, there's no sense of communities, individualism, there's a whole bunch of different social situations that are factors in this. But I think we need to acknowledge that what Corbyn is able to do, he's taking unpopular positions that are not popular, and just by the sheer situation that the country's in, his way of thinking being exposed to a mass amount of people is starting to take hold. And they may not agree with him all the way, but they're starting to see like he has a vision that's radically different from what's going on right now. We look at maybe Bernie Sanders, and for all the difference that you can say his vision has, he's standing next to Hillary Clinton. He's supporting, establishment politicians, saying that, when we point out their corruption, that's not important. They lied, cheated, and steal. That's not important. That's a very strange position to stand on as somebody who's trying to present a radically different message. You can say the Democratic Party failed, at the left forum. I mean, not the left forum, but the People's Summit. That's fine nature. He's catering to his audience, right? But that same failed party is what you're caping for right now. You're making concessions to them so that you can have speaking engagements. You're making sure that, you're coming out and supporting their candidates and making sure their candidates get in. You keep talking about, an emphasis on Trump, and then you carry their stupid Russia nonsense talking point all the way through with no evidence still yet to have been shown. I realized they just had like another little press conference where they put something out on the Intercept or something like that, and that was just like a fiasco. I read it, and it seemed like just a regurgitation of what we read before, but it really didn't really come up with anything. But everybody's touting it as new evidence when it's the same thing they said before. A lot of baseless accusation with some, little thing about some internet spoofing or phishing. It's like, what? That's not a real thing. That's not conclusive evidence of what you're trying. That's not any type of conclusive evidence of what you're trying to claim. That's not even spurious evidence. It's really just, hey, there's a spoofing attempt. Everybody gets hit with spoofing attempts. Does that mean I've been hacked by Russia? That's not what happened. You're just trying to conflate things that may not necessarily fit in a cohesive narrative. So you just kind of throw stuff out there and hope something sticks. Or, Lee Camp says this all the time. You just say it enough and people will begin to confuse familiarity with the truth. And that's a problem. That's a problem we really have to confront as the left. And we really have to respect it. Now I'm going to take some time before I move on to my next portion of the show right here. I want to take a second to take a look at some of the comments here. Unspoken voices, they come in, and he seems to have some pretty insightful comments. He says, why negotiate with someone when they are who they are? And then their actions have proven who they are. And then he says, intersectionality is the foundation you hear so often when reaching the policy and laws, but the historical part that created the problem or the root of the problem is often dismissed. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. How we allow ourselves to be manipulated through spectacle and media, and we kind of lose track, in the political process, any kind of process where it's like convoluted and long, you can kind of get lost in the details. So, you have somebody who claims to be a defender and champion of the poor, or somebody who wants to work for working families when, they have a long history for being on the wrong side of policy issues that affect millions and millions of working families. You have people that propose they want to expand diversity, but they've enacted laws that destroyed diversity in many industries. So how do you I would say unite with that? Why should there be any unification with something like that? I can't tell you. Like, I really can't tell you. So I talked earlier about the left forum, and I think if there's many, many takeaways from the left forum, it would be, well, I would say a takeaway from the left forum would be the emphasis on understanding things. This is how it works. This is some of the root causes of the issue. And like, again, when I talk to people, a lot of times these details or like you start reciting books, or you start reciting philosophy, or you start reciting history, nobody's interested in that. And there's an example, and this person is a great thinker, an activist, and a writer, an intellectual, but this person kind of bridged the gap between being an activist and an intellectual in a way that I think is effective. And looking back at people who have come along and changed things, they all read stuff like Marx and other radical philosophies at the time. They read that stuff. I mean, some of them have written it. All of the leftists of the time that were great thinkers and activists, they took the time to invest in learning about the history of revolution, about the thought process of revolution, and then studying, why some revolutions fail, why some revolutions succeeded. What are the takeaways? What are the things we can learn from that? And so whenever you're trying to talk to somebody and they start talking about, well, that stuff is not important. I don't want a history lesson. Well, it's like, no, if you really are about accomplishing what you say you want to accomplish, history is very important. It's paramount. It's something that cannot be avoided, because if you don't know your history, I'm not going to say you're doomed to repeat it. That stupid line everybody says, but I will say, Mark Twain, he said, history doesn't repeat. And I agree with that. But he also said, but it does rhyme often. And so a lecture that I took away from the left forum, I know I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to get to my point. I'm trying to give you background so you guys can understand the context in which I'm saying what I'm saying. Basically, Richard Wolff was talking about why revolutions fail. When you're reading some of these writings of revolutionaries of the time who were around when some revolutions succeeded, some revolutions failed, they want to know, why did revolution fail? And this is something that, you can't get away from when you read Marx, when you read Gramsci, when you read Thomas Paine, people that are about revolutionary thought. They kind of lay a groundwork or a foundation for something. And of course, these are people from different eras, right? But it's important that even people at the ground level should know a little bit of the basics. And I'm not saying you have to understand, you have to have read Capital volumes 1, 2, and 3. You have to have read the prison letters. I think Thomas Paine, common sense is short enough and it's easy enough to read that you should, peruse it. I think YouTube may have it online now, but Common Sense, is probably a good read for anybody that's, just a layman, just to have some kind of background and understanding how to think outside the box and what it means and what it takes, things of that nature. Okay. If you don't do those things, You are susceptible. You are super susceptible to propaganda, super susceptible to revisionist history, super susceptible to narratives that don't even make sense upon closer examination. No matter how smart you are, if you don't have some sort of reference, some sort of framework for which you understand things, it's really easy to get tricked up. And that's because this stuff is designed to trick people up, designed to trick even the most, educated person. If you're not taking the time to study, to read, to learn, to enrich yourself, to get involved in the issues, then guess what? You're easy to trick. It's just that simple. Whether it be through emotion, whether it be through logic, whether it be through subterfuge or some other method, it's easy to trick somebody. It's easy to trick somebody. You dangle the honeypot of hope and change, and people come in, and then once they get there, you say, well, change is hard. And you can't get everything that you want, but you can't get cynical. We got to keep fighting. And then you ask, well, fighting for what? And they just say, fighting for our values, fighting for this, and fighting for America, fighting for the promise of this and that, and start putting all these words out there, start flattering you a bit. You go home and think you did something. And then, 8 years later, you're wondering, why don't I have anything? I'm serious. If we don't understand these things, some technocrat, some wordsmith, some person of color or a woman, anything will come out of nowhere with some feel-good language, with some flattery, and they will derail change, or they will just flat out stop change, disperse movements, co-opt things, turn the left into like a dirty name, whatever it is. But they will be able to do these things. And the net effect of that will be to basically effectively subvert revolution, cut the legs right out from under it. So, to quote the words verbatim that stick in my mind, I wrote them down in my notebook here, and I just typed them up on my paper here that I'm basically reading some of my notes off of, like what I want to talk about. He said, why do revolutions fail? And then he said, Antonio Gramsci understood that they fail because the minds, individually or collectively, were not radicalized enough to envision something that does not resemble what already exists. So the reason why this stuck out to me is because, why do I do this show? Remember, I just started this show talking about radicalizing minds, subverting power through radical thought. Thought is powerful. The imagination is powerful. And I have long felt that on the media, there is nobody out there encouraging people into radical forms of thought. Like, everybody's a technocrat, or they're an erudite, and they kind of sit back and they kind of, have like a bird's eye view. They're not really invested in anything emotionally or anything, and they'll tell you, hey, you just have to take this because this is all you can achieve. And it's like, well, who says that that's really all you can achieve? How do you know? You never really know the bounds of possibility until you've bumped up against it and you've tried to exceed it and failed. And I'm going to tell a story. And this is a story I made up. It's about a prisoner. He's in a prison. He's there serving a sentence, and he talks to, a guard. They don't really like each other very much, And so years pass, they talk and, have interactions, whatever the basic interactions of a prisoner and a prison guard may be in a prison. I'm not trying to go into that, but there's a point of the story. The prisoner is going to be released, and he's getting ready to leave and be released. And the prison guard, being an ass, says to him, hey, you may be leaving this prison, but, you'll always be a prisoner. It's going to follow you wherever you go. And in a material sense, to some degree, he's right. But the prisoner turned to him and said, no, when I leave this place, the prison stays here. There are those who carry their prisons with them wherever they go. I'm not one of those. And so the point of that is to understand that, there's a prison in the form of walls, brick and mortar, steel bars, whatever they're made out of. But then there's the prison that each of us can carry with us everywhere we go. The prison of the mind, the bounds of your thought, Think outside the box. Sometimes what feels right may not be right. Take some time to critically examine things. And if something is said to be just, or something is said to be right, something is said to be fair, something is said to be, a correct way in dealing with the world, or the correct way of seeing things, think about it. Make it prove itself. Oftentimes it won't. To me, the entire right-wing ideology falls apart when you take some time to think about it. But that's just me. But hey, the reason why I brought up why I do this show, this is my form of activism. I've noticed that there's, PA as a whole has been accused of being some sort of dark money outfit or something along those lines. I'm here to tell you that at least, my channel, my show, and the people that I work with, and Ben himself, like, we all do this, as a volunteer thing. Like, any money you give us is really just to provide the platform or to enhance the coverage or enhance things in some way that will make it beneficial to you, the viewers. We do this as a service. I do this as a part of my activism. So it's not that we're making money off of this. Like, look at this. I'm literally, in a corner of my room. You can see my TV in the background. So this idea that we're being paid to say X, Y, and Z is a strange thing in itself. Let me take a step back, because I just hit like a crucial, critical moment when I said carrying a prison with you wherever you go. Please don't be afraid to think outside the box and understand that the way you think is influenced by the media that you consume, the books you read, the people that you talk to, the stuff you hear on TV, what you've learned in school. All of that has a huge controlling factor on the way you think. I was radicalized very, very early by just being an independent person. Like, I didn't accept anything anybody just told me, and just sheer life experience, happenstance. And I just so happened to run into a good number of teachers that fostered a creative thinking that, in some ways I've been able to escape some of it. That's not for everybody, but I just want to kind of throw it out there and help us understand that we can all be tricked no matter how smart. And we have to try to be critical and be logical, and first and foremost, be consistent in how we apply that analysis in our everyday lives. Now, in our politics, not just our everyday lives, our politics, I wanted to talk about something that's very dear to my heart, but I think I'm actually running out of time already. I started a little bit late today. Sorry, guys. I wanted to apologize for that first and foremost. I'm just going to go ahead and close it out here. And I'm going to say that sorry about that. I seem to have frozen for a second. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it off when I said how radicalized minds tend to not be radicalized, non-radicalized minds. When people are not radical enough, they tend to create something, but what they create ends up being the same thing that they wanted to leave. Historical example, transition from feudalism to capitalism. And from like a slave-based capitalism to a highly unequal, wealth-oriented or wealth-biased capitalism that we have now in the late game. Even though you moved from all of these things, in the end, supposedly progressing, you've changed the offset, you've changed the bottom, but you really have not changed the function. You've really not changed the system. And so when you do that, you end up in a situation where it still resembles what was there before. This capitalism resembles the capitalism of slavery. Slavery capitalism resembles the late feudal and the mid feudal era. That's just the way it is. So now I'm going to give you some quotes. The challenge of modernity is to live without illusions and without becoming disillusioned. I'm a pessimist because of intelligence, but an optimist because of will. And then one more, because this guy just had great quotes. All men are intellectuals, but not all men have in society the function of intellectuals. I'm going to leave it with that, guys. Have a good night. Thank you for joining us.